All right, so I'm super excited, Alex, to be sitting down again today. I know that you were a guest previously on the podcast.
Thank you for having me back.
Of course, yeah. This is our first technically repeat guest, even though I'll put a giant asterisk that this is not an official podcast episode. This is an after event recap, and so you and I kind of went through a little bit of the ringer yesterday with a pretty interesting new event format. Why don't you dive into maybe a little bit of what the event is, and I'd love to just kind of talk about your experiences, my experience being a guest on the event, and we'll see where the world takes us here.
Absolutely. So Keith and I were involved in an event that I helped produce called Operation Defend the North. And this is a theatrical, immersive, live tabletop exercise in front of an audience. And Keith and myself act as players within a scenario dealing with a cyber incident. And it's really interesting because, it isn't very scripted. There's a little bit of structure in terms of a storyline, but there's a lot of opportunity to fork, to go, down some rabbit holes and whatnot. And it really does, in my opinion, demonstrate the real chaos, unknowns of dealing with an actual cyber incident. And, we have, 100 or so people as audience members. And after 5 modules of over an hour each, we still have the audience. There's like no attrition because it's just so entertaining.
And that's super rare. Like it was, I'll say, and hopefully this doesn't come across the wrong way. It's a long day.
It is, yeah.
But we didn't lose
as
anyone.
our incidents.
Yeah, well, an incidents like that is true. But I think it did a really good job of mimicking some of that, because even you saw in some of the players, by the end of the day you are tired a little bit, and it is tiring in a different way to kind of be up in front of a group like that for 8, 9 hours.
Yep.
But I was incredibly surprised by the lack of attrition, because you've been to the conferences where the 4:00 session at the end of the day, you have the one lone person in the back with their notebook. Mm-hmm. This was not the case at this event.
Yeah, and it's because the audience wants to know what happened. It is a little bit of a whodunit, and we leave a little bit of mystery. In the Vancouver event earlier this year, I was suggested I might be an insider threat. And the people at the breaks were coming up and asking me. I'm like, I actually don't know, because none of this is scripted.
I am also open to finding out if I'm an insider threat.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, I had a brief moment yesterday where, as we were talking about the insider threat, I thought it was like maybe I could be an insider threat.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that ran through everyone's mind.
Yeah, I wanted to throw in there. I didn't have a chance, but we did want to have a playbook for dealing with insider threats, but no one wanted to write it.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And so diving into the format a little bit, and I think that there'll be an opportunity, we'll put it in the links of this, to go through and watch the entire simulation on YouTube. If you want to dive into it, you can watch each module. But if you were to give kind of the 3 to 4 minute overview of what actually happened, mm-hmm. This scenario, and this is one of the things that I was just blown away by, was so well crafted. And for someone, it might seem like a Hollywood movie. As you dive into the actual thought and evidence-backed decision-making, it's not that far off from something that is plausible, although it's probably amped up a little bit for entertainment value.
Just a little.
But what was the issue? Like, what was the challenge we were solving yesterday?
Well, the scenario is built based off of various things in the news. So factual events, historical events that we sort of glued together to make it entertaining. So in this scenario, there was a company called SiberX Power Co. They do power generation with solar and wind, and they also are in the AI data center business. Now, they had modernized their power generation capabilities with these smart inverters, and I try to put a lot of tongue in cheek, it's the smart inverter NG2000. A throwback to IT branding of the 2000s. And it had a vulnerability in it that was exploited by an unknown threat actor. And this vulnerability initially just prevented the company from managing their devices, which is a nuisance. But what was more sinister was that the attackers were able to upload a new firmware that had an algorithm in it to manipulate and disrupt the overall power grid. And this is really replicating a real scenario that there are smart inverters out there that have a backdoor. The blackout in Spain and Portugal earlier this year that was caused by an anomalous oscillation. that then resulted in a collapse of that regional grid. So we tried to play that, and none of us, including myself, are electrical engineers. We did have some ICS specialists on there, so we did have some people that had a little bit of knowledge of that space, but the scenario's focus was not on the grid itself. None of us are engineers, but rather it was on the IT and OT systems of SiberX PowerCo. And that was done on purpose because we need to, we want to fit this into a day. So we needed to focus on something that everyone could sort of like be comfortable with. And an IT/OT environment is fairly, everyone's quite comfortable with that type of environment. So that was our focus. And, the grid issues was just this interesting backstory that would keep people thinking like, oh, if this happened in real life, which arguably could, it'd be really annoying in not having electricity for days on end.
Well, definitely it increases the stakes, it ups the volume for sure. And then I think that one of the things that became really interesting to watch unfold is the interaction between the people, right? And I mentioned it at the recap at the end. As much as it was a technology issue, and as much as it was something that was to be solved, if we think about making sure the bad guys are out of the system, making sure that you put everything back together, and making sure that you kind of resume business as usual. The thing that I was really fascinated by, and I think the event captured incredibly well, was what are the decisions? What are the Kobayashi Marus? What are the things that are unwinnable? And you're really choosing, and I think you've said this in the prep for it, was between two bad choices.
Yeah.
And I think it captured the humanness of those scenarios really well. Because I know you're no stranger to being in these scenarios and not in a tabletop format, but in real life. Yeah. I feel like the people is the hardest part. Like, do you agree? Do you want to add to that?
Yeah. So, these events, these simulated tabletop exercise events, really do play on various angles of the challenge. And tabletops, as one of our players said, we're doing fire drills every year. When does a building catch on fire? We seldom do cyber drills, and your company's probably having a cyber incident right now. So there needs to be a different cadence, and it's because of awareness, particularly to the business. So, the executives probably look at cybersecurity and stuff as a cost center, and tabletop exercises as a technical exercise, and they're not taking advantage of the opportunity to be aware of incidents. Are definitely not a technical problem by itself, and in fact, the technical piece might be arguably the easiest piece. The scenario that we're going to be launching in Vancouver is on a national-wide grocer and food wholesaler who gets ransomed. And, once your business spins back up, great, the IT is working, the lights are blinking. What happens to all the spoilage? How do you restart your supply chain? How do you bring your furloughed workers back to work? Those are all challenges that I think without going through these types of scenarios, the business is going to keep on thinking cyber is an IT problem, throw a little bit more money at it, don't bother me.
Yeah, and I've seen that scenario on the other side too, where how do you resume the normal operations? Sure, you can remediate the threat. Sure, you can have your systems operational, but what are those business processes that actually allow you to resume business? Those can take months and months and months, if not some of them. It's in one case that I'm thinking of, it was almost a year just to resume business as usual, far past when the threat was mitigated.
Yeah, that's an expensive lesson to learn.
And so is that kind of the intent of these events, is to be able to bring that conversation to the limelight? Because I think yesterday, there was some technical elements, and I appreciated that there was the glossary that would pop up on the screen whenever an acronym was used, which I know.
A new addition, by the way.
I know us technical folks sometimes and I'm probably being overly generous when I point at myself when I say technical folk, but there's a lot of acronyms in the technology industry. But we didn't really dive into the manufacturers. We didn't dive into the architecture. There was no, there were some logs that were kind of gone through, but I would say more performatively than practically.
Visual aids, yeah.
Yeah, but it was a people dilemma.
Yeah, and again, most are. A lot of the goals with tabletops, whether, the SiberX event is for awareness and entertainment, but companies need to be running tabletop exercises, on a good cadence, at least yearly. But like I see value in probably be doing it more. And there's two values there. There's that awareness piece that the business as a whole starts to understand. Like, IT is sort of the glue between all these things, and when it is affected, all the other things are affected. And then for on the people side is like, I was going to say technical, but absolutely not. It's everyone is building that muscle memory because, and actually a really good, meta point here is we've been experimenting with like cheat sheets, and the team gave me a cheat sheet that was just like incredibly verbose. Yeah. So like I'm trying to go through this in between, listening to people and whatnot, and it was too much information, and that was very reflective of an incident response plan that a company builds out. They'll build a beautiful one, maybe, ideally probably 20 pages, but like potentially 100 pages. What is the use of that during an incident? Like, you're not going to be able to read it. And thus we fall back to our training, our muscle memory. And that's also like when you look, all their players didn't have the cheat sheet and arguably didn't have that much preparation beyond this is sort of what we're going to do. And that was by design to show their muscle memory versus their ability to flip through papers quickly and go through a checklist.
Well, and I think that was part of the thing that made it really intimidating going in. And, I'm not afraid to admit that I was texting you on the weekend being like, oh, what have I signed up for?
You're not the only one.
But I think that made it more real. And to your point, it made it more reflexive rather than just trying to remember some sort of stat on a sheet. I think I shared yesterday as well, there was a really interesting podcast I was listening to, and they were talking about the Secret Service agents that follow the president around.
Yep.
And for those that don't know, there's a new set of codes every day that are essentially prepared for a nuclear launch if it got to that. But everyone thinks about the practicality of delivering the codes and kind of carrying the football around, et cetera, et cetera. No one thinks about delivering the message. Mm. And if you think about this scenario of me looking in the eyes and be like, okay, we're at DEFCON 5 or DEFCON 1, I always get my DEFCONs wrong. We need to now, launch our nuclear arsenal. They practice that at the beginning of every single shift, every single day.
Yeah.
And I think that the higher stakes the emotion, the more you have to practice. And these are existential risks when you're in a cyber incident.
Yeah, and that example is like sort of the biggest job in the world. Yeah. Making a decision to keep the world or destroy it. And that's, again, to build in the muscle memory and to remove the emotion because, and I actually watched Crimson Tide a month or so ago where it does have a dilemma where they get a command to launch and then they get a broken message about the launch. And one person's like, well, we followed the original message, let's launch and ruin the world. And the other, Denzel Washington, is like, well, no, like, what if that's a cancel? We shouldn't do this. This could be really bad. And those people are trained in the submarines and the missile silos. The guys walking around with the nuclear football are trained to be robots in that regard and not second guess the command, not bring any emotion and whatnot. And incident response hopefully is not going to force people to make autonomous decisions that are not in the best interest of themselves, the company, society. But that is what muscle memory is all about.
But I think one of the players yesterday as well brought up a really interesting point, and the purpose of some of those incident response plans sometimes isn't even necessarily to follow the incident response plan. Yeah. But it's to make some of the really important decisions before you need to actually make them when you have your back up against the wall.
Yeah, and there was a question, and I think there's always questions. So the event also has an online component and an app where people can ask questions, through their phones. And they're like, well, what about this? Why aren't you doing this? And totally. And again, it's important to recognize well, why didn't we do that? And it's the muscle memory isn't strong enough. It's not built in. All of our players are leveraging their experience and their expertise in real time, under fire, in front of an audience, and on camera, to make those decisions. So naturally, when you're in that like stressor position, you're getting that tunnel vision, and what's in that tunnel vision is your muscle memory, and what's outside of it is all the things you're supposed to do. Yeah. And that's very reflective of actual incidents. You're never going to get 100% on your checklist, unfortunately, because time, somebody said time is the currency, and, we don't have a lot of it. So any analysis paralysis is likely to result in a larger blast radius, and, long nights.
Yeah. And I feel like the long nights probably come part and parcel with any cyber incident. But what are some of the surprising things that you've noticed from these events, right? Like, I think that you're no stranger to tabletops, and you're no stranger to some of these incidents in real life. Mm-hmm. Are there any things, as you went into the partnership with SiberX, that you were surprised by?
Every incident is going to be a surprise, whether it's a simulation or not. Again, coming from more of a technical background, and a blue teamer, I do have more of a laser focus on the forensics, on the detection, and technical containment piece. The things that like are less natural to me is the communication, is the legal, things like that, which, I'm educated on that through, standards and tabletops, but it isn't really my forte. So seeing that diversity during the tabletop's really good, particularly since I have the privilege of making the scenarios. I put some stuff that, like, ideally I want them to touch on the things that I don't know about, because, that's their expertise, and we'll see where it goes. But yeah, like communication, and that's something that I think generally, under the stressors of an incident, real or simulated, we do forget that maybe we have some people to call. And that's, again, just because of that narrow focus of, we got to stop the bleeding, then we'll let people know. But, ideally a mature organization does recognize the importance of communication, both to people internally, externally, and also regulators.
Yeah, it's really funny when you see how some of those people in either real life scenarios that haven't practiced it, or in these tabletops, how they actually react to some of the stimulus or to some of the prompts that are out there. Did everything go as you thought it was going to yesterday?
No, but I think by design. Like, none of it's scripted, and what we've done in the recent months is we put a little bit more framework that, like, there's 5 modules, essentially based off of NIST 861R2, and the incident response lifecycle, which is detection, analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and then lessons learned, a debrief. No. So, throughout that, I have, at the beginning of the module, we have some structure of like what we should be talking about. And then at the end, to make sure that we are setting ourselves up for the next module, we have some like sort of tidy up tasks, questions to ask. But the middle is free for all. We have a pool of injections that we can use and visual aids. And my new title, Chaos Engineer, is to help ensure that there's nothing linear about what's going on. And again, that's by design, because and in the example, at the end of the containment phase, we're like, we did it. We've contained the threat. Let's move on to eradication. And while ideally that's where we want to be, it seldom is that linear, and likely we miss something or whatnot, and the threat is still propagating outside of our understood scope. And in this scenario, and in the eradicate, we're getting planned on removing the threat and getting ready for recovery, when we find out, nope, it actually moved laterally to something else that we really care about. So I think those are, how we get to those places is always the surprise. And what I really did love was a lot of the questions the audience had, both online and as well, like on microphone. What I found really interesting was like some of the students were like tearing apart the visual aids, which are not necessarily accurate, the IPs and whatnot, but they were like, well, how could it be this if it was an internal, RFC 1918 IP address? I'm like, it was natted.
So was this your first time with this many students, sir?
No, because like the Vancouver events at SFU, and
Okay.
we rely on students to volunteer and attend. I'm an advisor with SFU, and I've got a student project I work with, so all my students will be there on Thursday. But like I was interested in like how much they expected the visuals to be accurate to the scenario, and certainly there's room for improvement there, but also it's really not about the data. That's just a visual aid to help with the conversation. Like, we did look at the technology. It's more so, what does the business need to do and in what order to get to a good business resumed state.
Yeah, I was blown away just by the engagement and some of the questions. I think you set a new record. There was a gentleman that asked. I think he probably spoke more than I did, but they were great questions.
So I did chat with him afterwards. Like, so he does have a little bit of an electrical engineering background.
Yeah.
So he actually, kept me honest on the scenario, and like I told the audience, this is researched, but I'm not an electrical engineer. I'm just a very curious person, and will learn a bunch of random facts that I need to figure out how to use. And turns out in the last year or so, I got fairly familiar with how electrical grids work, and how they can fail, etc. And that also becomes from part of my life experiences that I lived through the 1997 ice storm power outage without electricity for 10 days. And why that sucked was I had just got internet at home for the first time, and a month later, lost it for 10 days, and yeah, that sucked. But I also lived through the 2003 blackout, which was a little over 24 hours of no electricity in the heat of summer, August, I believe, and I was living on the 9th floor of an apartment building with no elevator operating. So, so I've got a little bit of personal interest of why did that happen, how did it happen, et cetera, and I rolled it into the scenario.
Very cool. Is that your happy place in kind of building out these? Because there was just an absurd amount of detail and contemplation around how this actually could and would work.
Yeah, this is like this passion and strength that is like evolving and growing right now. That like, bolting on that backstory really enables an audience to be interested in it and feel how it could affect them and whatnot. So. Into the future, we'll be doing way more in-depth events that have a lot of backstory and research. Again, leveraging all bad things that have happened and just gluing them together in a theatrical format.
Do you hope that some organizations, like there are some eerie similarities to things that are very real in the world? Do you hope that some organizations take notice and maybe see themselves a little bit in SiberX Power Co.?
Yeah, like it's, all the challenges and human error and things like that were all derived from real events. We've just, glued them together to be the most surprising linkage of coincidences. But, it is definitely plausible. And, ideally we inspire people to like have a little bit more awareness of like their blind spots, and both in their, like how their business operates, how resilient their business is, but also the importance of running these events internally. And there's various ways of doing tabletop exercises internally or outsourcing to consultants, but like the ones that I say stay well away from, and I've seen them countless times, is like it's a script and people are just going through it. That's not how it sticks. Like you need that stressor, going through your body at that time when this situation happens, because you will not forget it. But reading through a 10-page script of like, all right, Keith, you say this and I'm going to say that, like I've already forgotten what we were talking about.
Well, and that's where sometimes I think that you need the theatrics. Mm-hmm. And you need to find a way to simulate pressure, right? And so, you and I sitting around a boardroom table reading our IR plan. It's like, okay, cool. Now it's time to go for a beer.
Yeah. Who's done first?
Yeah. And it doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
And so I think that the ability to actually simulate the pressure and simulate those environments within your corporate environment create some surprises. Even yesterday, I think one of the things that I found really entertaining was, module 1, everyone's kind of getting their feet under them, feeling out the day. Module 2, people are starting to get comfortable. Module 3, people were throwing fastballs at each other. And, a couple of people in particular had a mission to like trip up the other people.
Yeah.
And I recognize that just for any other like future potential guests, like it was the internal kind of tight knit group. Not I was throwing no fastballs intentionally.
Yeah. The intention for our players is to have a great time. And they do, right? They come back like, okay, that was really fun. Particularly like yourself, that was like, what am I doing? And like, how do I prepare? Like, don't. They come back and be like, that was super fun. The curveballs that we throw are between myself and my co-facilitator, or if I've got some tight friends that are on the advisory board, who are also challenging me to do so. Yeah. That's where I started throwing in some curveballs and having fun. And again, it's good fun because the audience starts to laugh and really appreciate the humor, and not that it's like that humor distracts from reality. It's actually, unfortunately, probably quite real. But yeah, like, it's supposed to be fun for everyone. That's why, like, as I mentioned earlier, like we keep this, if we're going to have a CEO that's sort of acting recklessly or like against process or whatnot, we want that to be a fictional character. So it's not putting any of our players in a position where they have to act like a jerk. Unless they want to.
Oh, I said I'll be the Ralph Macchio,
Yeah, exactly. But having the cliche, disconnected CEO on his yacht, pinging on email, and be like, why isn't the business up, and all this, and like really forcing the company's hand to do something when we arguably have a process and we've agreed upon this process and we're following it. Not to say processes, particularly in instance, have to be followed rigidly. Again, it's mostly there. It's the plans are useless, but planning is everything quote. It's having something to follow, building that muscle memory so that when it actually happens, we don't have to pull out the cheat sheet, at least not immediately. We have a very good familiarity with the destination.
Yeah, I can't applaud the format enough. I think even the feedback that I got from a lot of the people in the audience, as in a couple of the breaks, like it was like something they hadn't seen before. They felt like they were a part of it. Mm-hmm. They felt some of the stress and pressure. What's next for SiberX in the event? So you mentioned an event in Vancouver. What else is on the horizon and roadmap?
This season's going to wrap up in Toronto in December. So Vancouver, October 23rd, and then December 4th in Toronto. And I'm curious about I love the iteration that we've been doing, and it's like, well, what does the next version look like, and how do we incorporate more of an in-depth story? How do we leverage CyberX's very powerful AV capabilities, like the news reports and stuff like that is like their secret sauce, and it's like really clever because it's a way of providing the audience and the players with a quick, rapid summary of what's going on, and then scene we jump into it. So I do really like that format. NIST released a new computer incident response or incident handling framework, 861R3. And my first glance, I looked at it, I didn't really love it because it started deviating away from what I've been trained on for so many years. But reading through it more recently, I'm like, okay, yeah, I want to update some of the Operation Defend the North to that framework to align to current standards. But it did actually address some of the realities of incidents that I think they felt like they made the process sound too linear when it's anything but.
Yeah, it's definitely back, forward, sideways, circle,
and in parallel. So again, it's creating those experiences. And what I will say, when I joined CyberX in the spring of this year to help bring it to Vancouver, I did keep on asking Ali, who is like MC extraordinaire and facilitator, and I was like, can I have the script? And he's like, oh yeah, it's coming. And he kept on, delaying. And at first I was like, did he not do his homework? Sorry, Ali. But what he was actually doing was avoiding me being scripted. And within the first few minutes of module 1, he turns to me, he's like, the news says that something's happening and our security team's saying nothing. What do you have to say for yourself? I'm like, like deer in headlights. What the hell? No prompts, no injections, like, like nothing for me to riff on. And instantly, I'm in front of all my peers of Vancouver. Like the hair on the back of my neck stands up, heart rate increases, pupils dilate. I'm now like, trying to respond in real time. And at first, at the break, I was like, dude, what was that about? And 4D chess here. He's like, I needed to put you in that stressful position so that I would see a natural reaction. And I was like, oh, that is clever. And it really worked because it actually forced me to, I got like somewhat emotional and like got, started like responding more aggressively to him. But I realized I just need to pull all my experiences from working in this industry for 20 something years and, change the names to protect the innocent and start sharing those stories. And it just made for like really entertaining, back and forth, and him and I have just figured like just such a cadence between ourselves.
You guys had a great balance of just a little bit of back and forth, but it felt real, right? And there was some kind of healthy tension there. And I remember you calling me, or we talked after that event. You were like, you had like a visceral reaction. And you're like, you kind of got your back up where it's this is my team, and all of a sudden you kind of forget you're in a simulation. And
yeah. People in the audience at break were coming up to me like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, yeah. And they're just like, "Man, like, is this script?" I'm like, no.
You're like, I have no clue what's going on.
Yeah, in like module 2 or 3 at the break, people are like, "I think you're the insider threat. Are you?" I'm like, I don't know.
I'm finding out along with you. Do you have any questions for me, like from an experience standpoint, like?
So yeah, like absolutely. So, like as a player, you came to me, and there's been some other players that have been like, listen, like I don't know if I'm the right person for this role, and I have to sell them like, hey, listen, like based off of your experience, your background, your ability to speak to humans, like I think you would actually be perfect. And your background is much more on the IT side than the cybersecurity side, which I think sort of, gave you pause. And, in my mind, I was like, well, IT actually is very important because, arguably cyber side is generally on the, reconnaissance and investigation side, but not necessarily on the execution side. That usually falls to the IT team. So, how's your experience as like somebody that was representing IT operations?
I think it was good. I think that the challenges that came up, and I'm glad we went there, were around logistics, right? And in those incidents, right, there's so many people that need to be mobilized. There's so many different factors from the mindset of your team to how do I get the 5 people that I have to 20 sites. To budget constraints that obviously they kind of get loosened up quite a bit during anything like this, but those dollars are still real, and I think that's like the incident did a really strong job of reflecting some of those realities and giving the space to have some of those conversations. I think one of the other pieces that I thought was really interesting when we think about adding curveballs was some questions around the infrastructure and controls that we had in place. And being like, oh yeah, that was actually cut from the budget last year. We'd proposed it, but the board said no. Yeah. And so these are very real things from a IT ops standpoint.
Everyone in the audience is like,
yeah, I've seen that.
I've had that. Like I've totally had the best idea ever. Yeah. It would have saved the company, blah blah blah, but it got shot down. And now there's an "I told you so" moment, which you can't do. But like, and those are those curveballs that I like to throw in. That like. And, when I run tabletops for corporations, anytime there's a Brent. So if you've ever read the Phoenix Project, there's like, a very smart engineer on the team that just knows the entire stack, but he's a single point of failure. And he's constantly fixing, dumb, simple problems instead of focusing on building and more strategic work. And anytime I come across somebody like that in a tabletop, they're instantly getting a Disney cruise because that's not the point to show off the smartest person in the room. It's like that is now a critical weakness of the company. So by putting them on a boat where you can't now participate. And man, the Brents of tabletop exercises get pissed when they get pulled off. Yeah. And I've actually had to do that with Rob LeBay when we were doing tabletops at his previous company. He just knows everything, right? And we had to pull him off and put him on a Disney cruise because of that. And he's a cruise guy, so he probably was pretty happy.
You know,
yeah. But it's very fascinating to deal with those constraints. And anytime I come across somebody in the tabletop that's just like, oh, it'll just be A, B, C, D, that's where we will throw in some human or process component that derails.
I agree. And I think the other really interesting element, and I think it goes back to human nature, is the desire to solve versus the need to act. And so even within our panel, which is a group of very seasoned IT, security, OT experts, you could see the gravitation, especially in kind of phase 1 and 2, to try and point a finger and to try and say, okay, well, who did it? Where is this coming from? Where is the where can I assign responsibility, and in my mind kind of tie a nice bow around this?
It's human nature, right? We want to know who done it. That's why there are so many, murder documentaries on Netflix, right? Like, we really are passionate about that conclusion. And, so many times I've been, arrive on site to an incident and sit down with somebody or many people from the C-suite, and that's what they care about. Yeah. And like, I have to push back a little bit and say, like, is that the most important thing to you guys? Or is it bringing the business back up? And they're like, well, yeah, we want that, but we also want to know this. Like, of course. But there's a lot of work involved with attribution and forensics, which, depending on your resource capability, could really take away from the actual goal, which is primary. So it's usually having to convince them, like, we can do that, but I think it's pretty important to bring your business back online and steer them in the right direction. But I think it's just our human nature 100%. To know. Yeah.
But I think it was painted really well with the, and I'm trying to remember who said it. I think it might have been Sherry, like, where, let's leave that to the law enforcement, right? There's people that literally, build their careers, their infrastructure, their problems, like, they're detectives, mm-hmm. And they have the infrastructure, the manpower, the incentives to go and chase the bad guys. And so let's find those collaborations rather than try to take that entire load on our shoulders as well. And I feel like sometimes it's not necessarily painted in that practicality when you talk to everyone. Everyone wants to be the detective in the movie and the star of the show on that front, and be involved in this big, all of a sudden.
You're describing HBO the game movie. Clue.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone wants to be in those shoes, but I think the reality and practicality is, like, there's
is that important?
Yeah.
And it's just like, again, that's our cognitive bias is saying, like, that is important. Like, no, it's not. And no part of the business agrees with that. But the personal emotion, like, hey, I've been attacked. The caveman brain inside me now needs to know what my threat is, instead of, the bigger picture threat of, like, my business is down and I'm not making money.
Well, and just for a very crude example, like, if you're just standing in a crowd and someone walked up and punched you in the face, you'd probably want to know who that person was.
And again, like, that is a great example of, like, yes, you do want to know that because the threat is unknown and is still immediate.
Yeah.
In the cyber instance, like, arguably they're long gone and on the other side of the world and outside of any jurisdiction that Canadians can reach.
Yeah.
So is it that important? And I will say, in the scenario, which was a power company, which would be regulated, there probably is a little bit more requirement for the forensics, but also because it's, like, arguably contributing to our critical infrastructure, there would be a lot of partners. There'd be CCCS, RCMP, and all the fixins that go along with those two groups that would be very interested and would also provide assistance. However, the majority of businesses that fall outside of that regulated critical infrastructure space don't necessarily get that level of service or care. Certainly, one of my colleagues at Mirai, her previous job was at the RCMP doing public outreach, trying to help businesses understand the RCMP is your friend. They're here to help. They're not going to de-rack all your servers if you call them. because that was a cliche problem. You call law enforcement, your entire IT infrastructure gets pulled, and now you have to
crime
start
scene.
Yeah. And her mission was to help increase awareness of why it's important to report this. And it's because if it's being underreported and thus funding can't be allocated to addressing it, and thus we believe law enforcement can't help, so we don't report it, and it's a vicious cycle. So, but I will say, like, again, back to many companies, they are sort of on an island on their own, and they do rely on their technology and cybersecurity partners to help them on that. But as I think I mentioned on the panel, like, I've a certain amount of training on the forensic side, but like, I don't know, like 1 or 2 instances where it was actually important to follow chain of custody on how to capture data in a secure manner. I'm not saying that isn't a requirement, but many companies, again, don't care to spend that much money doing the forensics beyond like a personal passion project. They care to get the business back online, generally after I suggest the more important option.
Definitely. I think that you and I could continue to unpack this and probably talk for the next 4 or 5 hours. I know you have a flight to get to today as well, so I want my goal to you was to get you back on your flight and get you to the airport in time. Last kind of takeaways, last thoughts around the event, things you're excited about in the future. Go.
Yeah, like I'm very excited to work with SiberX into 2026, and really leveraging my passion about bringing reality and interesting stories to these scenarios, and really creating an entertaining experience for the event, and really inspiring companies to do these more internally, and really helping understand the value, because I think it's those are the types of things like where we sort of don't see the value in fire alarms because the threat has no proximity to us. The vividness of that threat of being in a building that's burning is almost zero for most, at least in North America. But yeah, we still do it, and we have an apathy towards fire drills. Like, this is annoying. I was in a meeting. We have to sort of look at it the same way that, like, well, we do have the chance of experiencing a cyber incident is quite high for most companies. We want to build that muscle memory, and I want to help increase that value of doing so, whether it's just a small roundtable with executives all the way up to more of a full-blown event with the entire company. I think those pay dividends to business resiliency.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me be a part of the event. It was an absolute pleasure to be a part of the day. I really enjoyed it. It was my first kind of virtual tabletop in this format with a giant audience, and was super grateful to be a part of it. Thanks again, Alex.
Hey, thanks for having me. Every tabletop exercise I go through, I just want to talk about it. So thanks for having me, and I'll see you in the future.
I like it. Cheers.
Cheers.